Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Amy, and this is Monumental, a small show about the big things God does in the lives of ordinary people.
We have Lisa Cochran joining us to share the journey that she and her husband and their family have been on with their son, Nate, who was diagnosed with autism.
It's difficult to have children or a child with disabilities of any kind, and she gives us a glimpse into that life, that journey that you take, but specifically how good God is through those hardships. So we're really thankful to have her here to get with us today.
We had our first son, Noah, and 2 years later, we had his baby brother, Nate. And with Nate, we had a healthy pregnancy and a healthy delivery. And, the early year, his first year was it was good. It was sweet. We didn't have any, concerns whatsoever. And he was starting to say words, just a couple words before he turned a year. It was just like mama, dada.
Yeah.
He was 18 months old. And I remember he was, up to this point, just kind of a fiery personality, emotional, a little hot temper, that kind of thing. But it was at 18 months old, I remember he was in the living room, and I don't remember what happened exactly, but he was standing there and he let out this blood-curdling scream. Stop whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And it was just it was frustrated. And it was like, oh, wow. It was really...
That's intense.
It was intense, and it was almost like that. What's wrong?
Yeah.
So, sometimes his frustration, it would be screaming. And
at first you were just thinking, oh boy, this boy's got a temper.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, he, in looking back, once he said those first few words, then he's just stopped saying them altogether. We never heard them again until he was over 3. Right. And so, we kept saying, he's frustrated because he's a late talker.
Right.
And he's screaming. But, you just kind of play that off. But, as he was just getting a little bit older, like, age 2, just the screaming was probably the biggest concern that we had. And it was obviously very frustrating and trying because for years, we started to learn more and more what kind of would, quote unquote, set him off. But even then, it was still difficult because, he could get into a screaming fit for like 30 minutes. And that might not seem like a really long time.
No, it seems like an eternity.
But this screaming was like this really, I can't even.
Intense.
Yeah.
So did you think that this is just a parenting issue that we need to address, or did you talk to your pediatrician or friends or...
I did. I remember our one pediatrician who we did love. I do remember talking with her about it, and she was saying to me that it's typical for the second born to be a late talker and be frustrated because Noah was just really he talked early, and so he was just really talkative, and so it kind of made sense. Like, oh, Noah's doing all the talking for him, and you don't want anything to be wrong.
Yeah,
no, right.
You know what I mean? Like even those early screams, there was something that just wasn't right. And like, I knew it in my gut, but you don't know, you just try to like rationalize.
That's about the last thing you want to go to. There's
right.
Yeah.
It was just he was just very, would get agitated really easily. And he was just so young, but he was like so sweet and funny. And he was just a sweet little boy. But then he just had he would just
30-minute.
Well, he would just, something would trigger him.
Yeah.
And it would just be awful because then he would just, I don't know, he'd just like lose himself. And then eventually, he would, calm down after a while, but it was, just really trying. And then, it was hard, comparing him to kids his age. Like I, didn't want to do that,
right.
but it was hard not to notice his delays. I mean, it wasn't just with speech. It was just with his whole like communication. So he had the expressive language delays and then his receptive language, just that understanding. That started to become concerning for me because there was something like, why doesn't he understand?
Yeah.
So it was right when Nathan was about 2, or right before he turned 2. At this time, we're living in a duplex from friends of ours from church, lived on one side, and they were kind enough to let us rent off of them. And so my friend Eva had spent a lot of time with Nate. And she had worked in the education field. And I also had another friend, Laura, who also worked with children with special needs. And so it was Eva and Laura had come to my door one day, and, they came in and they're like, "We need to talk to you." And I was like, "Okay." And, I'm very, very close with Eva and, good friends with Laura. And they said, "I think you should have Nate evaluated." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And then they went on to say that they were concerned about his development. I remember, as they were talking, I was definitely holding back tears, because it was I knew it. I knew that there was something not quite right. But when it was other people noticed too,
Right.
And so when they left, I cried. I cried. And then, when Jared came home, we talked about it. We prayed about it. And it was hard too for Jared, because it was you just want to think, oh, he's just going through a phase, Looking back, for Eva to, come to us, I'm just so thankful that they did.
So how long did it take until you made the decision? Yeah, let's
it was
get him evaluated?
It was quick. Yeah, it was a fairly quick decision. I think
So
with
did you
just in
have
a couple
someone-
days.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Someone come into the home,
they
or-
recommended FIT. It was called Family, Infants, and Toddlers.
Yeah.
And so they came in. So the one lady came into our home, and we didn't know what to expect. She was super, very sweet, very kind. And so she asked a ton of questions, and then she spent some time with Nate. And then, so what she recommended was a speech and language pathologist and an occupational therapist. And they were to come into our home. I believe it started at the beginning twice a week. And then they started coming together on the same day.
So just for my understanding, FIT, is that similar to First Steps?
I would guess it's Family, Infants, and Toddlers.
Okay. So it wasn't a autism evaluation.
No.
It was just a general
Delay. Yes.
Delay eval.
Correct.
Okay. So FIT comes in.
They come in, and then
made their recommendation.
Yep. I wish I could have said that I was overjoyed and thankful that somebody was coming to help us, and I was not.
I feel like somebody was sort of taking your job in a sense.
Yeah, it was a really,
territory.
Those first few visits were really hard and awkward, because, I had these two strange people in my house, and they were very kind, but it was hard for me to see another person, connecting with my kid, or trying to, at least. It was I wasn't doing a good enough job, and I'm just being completely honest with my feelings, those beginning days. And it was just humbling for me to say, number one, we need help. Number two, when people come in to help and you feel kind of I felt kind of like a failure. And of course, now looking back, I don't think any mother should ever feel like that or know that that's just a lie. But those were the first few visits. And then I started to feel more comfortable. Again, I think it was God's humbling. We went through, teaching him sign language. And whenever they started doing that, when the speech pathologist started doing that, then I felt involved. I felt more helpful, rather than just kind of being an onlooker.
Yeah.
And so that was a turning point for me, where I felt more part of the team. And then, the insecurity and the pride, or, whatever it is I was feeling early on, it did turn into gratitude. And I was thankful, that they were there. That was from between ages 2 and 3, because by the time he turned 3, he was no longer eligible for FIT. We actually moved from that house out, and we moved out into the country. And then we wanted to continue with the therapy. And so they put us in touch with I believe it was just the local public school system. But before we moved, it was near the end of the summer. And so he was almost 3. The first signs of autism the first time I heard the word autism from his speech pathologist, Nathan, was he was starting to do this weird thing with his eyes where he would skim anything that had a straight edge, like a table or a bookshelf, a countertop, siding on a house. He would get really, really close to it, and he would just walk along it. And so it was just odd and quirky. And we were outside, and her name was Maggie. She was getting ready to leave. And I was like, he keeps doing this. Like, it's so weird. She probably had inkling that he was on the spectrum, just working so close with him. But then when I was like, what is he doing? And she's like, I think what he's actually doing is stimming. And I was like, in my mind, I'm like, what the heck is stimming? Yeah, what's stimming? And it is actually something that's very common with children with autism. It's a sensory thing that kids will do just for either something if they're nervous that they need to have some control, or if they're bored. Yeah. And so he was doing this all the time.
So when she mentioned this stemming thing, then that's a common thing with autism. So that was the first time you heard
That was autism. The first time I heard the word autism.
Did she immediately connect that to autism at that point?
Yeah.
So did she say, I think he might be on the spectrum?
Well, she said, I think it would be a good idea for you to see a developmental pediatrician.
At this point, were you like, well, we're down the road, we're getting help? Were you just very accepting of whatever anybody said to you at that point? Or, okay.
No. It was scary. It was just, I think for me, it was just the fear of the unknown. Like, what's autism? I mean, like, the only thing I knew of autism was the movie Rain Man. Yeah. That was it. I didn't really know hardly anything about it. And I think that's what the scary thing was, is just like that, the fear of the unknown. And he also, like, he wasn't pointing to anything. Typically kids, when they are communicating, they'll point to what they want. So those were certain things that were brought to our attention that he wasn't pointing at anything. He developed this fetish with rocks to the point where and he loved being outside. And so anytime we're outside, he would always be carrying around rocks. He didn't really ever play with toys. He had a basket of rocks in our kitchen. Oh, that's not so weird. And he would he'd dump them out. And I don't know what he would do with them, but they were like, that was like his toy. In hindsight, when I was able to, I watched a documentary about a woman with autism, and I learned that him carrying around these rocks was most likely something that was very comforting to him. And one time, Noah and I we wanted to surprise Nate, so we painted his rocks. Well, we took Pow out of his rock basket, and we painted them, put little designs on them, and like ladybug or whatever, and then we put him back in his basket, and then he dumped it. We're standing there, and he dumped his rock basket out, and we were watching them, and he took all the painted ones out, and we're like, and he set them to the side. And didn't want anything to do with those painted rocks. So, poor Noah, but he was
give
actually
me the dirty rock.
I was just funny. So we did actually have this evaluation from a developmental pediatrician, and basically he came back with this diagnosis of pervasive behavioral disorder, which is basically a catch-all phrase for behavioral issues, developmental issues. His odd behavior. So the screaming is still going on. The odd behaviors started right around 3. So right before he's 3. So then he did the eye skimming, and then he's doing loving his rocks, which wasn't that odd. I didn't think it was that odd, but, and then, this thing called the tribal dance, where he would, in our kitchen, with one foot, he would go in a circle. And it started off just with his foot, but it was like this beat, right? And then he started putting his I wish so bad that I would have got him on video. But he would just do this, and we would let him do it for a while. I don't know. He just would do all these things that it was just Nate. Nate is Nate, and Nate is still Nate. And so it was just, and then so we called it the tribal dance because that's what it looked like and sounded like. And we'd let him do it 20 minutes after half hour, like, okay, Nate, time to be done. But again, that he was stimming,
right?
So he's doing odd behaviors, right, still screaming.
So that did not improve with therapies, and
no, and that was disappointing for us, because once he had learned some sign language, those words started those signs actually started turning into words.
Yeah.
And so
connecting the
The screaming, is it, I mean, there's auditory, sensory, these different things going on. Is it pain? Is it?
Yes. Well, so because he was, basically nonverbal and, from what we had learned is he most likely was having some type of sensory discomfort, overload. There was a season where we could not leave the house. I couldn't take him anywhere. Like even with Sunday school, he started throwing cars, or not the cars. I think it was actually Matchbox cars. He would just be throwing things in a Sunday school class. So we couldn't even take him to Sunday school.
Right.
And he was screaming in the kids' faces. Like he had this weird ritual where he would, every time we picked him up from Sunday school, he would get into a kid's face. This sounds so weird. And he would scream 3 times. I can't explain it. 3 times.
Never 4, 3.
3 times in the kid's face, this far away, as loud as he could. And so what we had to do was whenever the Sunday school teacher saw us coming, she would have to take Nate out of the room so we could get him. And he kept wanting to go back in to scream in somebody's face.
Was that like his goodbye, or?
I don't know. It was like this. So he had like these ritual things that he would then do. And so this is whenever we thought he was just like a control freak. So he would have like certain things that he would have to do. Yeah. And so again, still no autism diagnosis. And so we think, we have a child that is
just super controlling.
Super controlling. But it was more than that. It was like him losing himself and screaming over something so unbelievably trivial. If he had this thing at dinner time that, he would flick on the dining room light. And one time I flicked it on and that was it. It was the rest of the night was just completely ruined. And so it was like so irrational and nothing, it just didn't make any sense to us.
Yeah. And were you thinking, okay, these are serious discipline issues we got to work on?
Now we went through, and so again, God's kindness, like one thing that was in Jared and I was we cannot give him control. But there is that temptation and that tendency that you want to, of course, you don't want your kid freaking out.
Right.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go. So you want to,
It would be easy to just be like, okay, I'm just going to always let him turn the light on kind of thing. And do that with a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
But
with him, that's what we noticed. So we always thought that there was like this power struggle going on, that he wanted to be in charge. And it's like, no, you're not. You're the child. We're the parents. That kind of, friction and typical, situations where, your kid pushes the envelope and, you discipline them or you rebuke them, everybody can move on with their life.
Right.
Nathan just couldn't move on. You didn't want to walk on eggshells because that's a horrible way to live.
Right.
But I see that temptation because, you want to keep the peace.
Yeah.
And Jared was very, thankfully, he was very, very strong in that sense where he was not going to let Nathan have control. And then when we would put him to bed at night, like Jared had this thing that he did with him where he had to swing him in his arms and they had to count and Jared would throw him in his bed. And so he had developed all these like kind of little rituals as he started getting older. Yeah. So
and then if you didn't do one of them.
If we didn't do them or if we didn't do them correctly.
Right.
So when he turned 3, God was so kind to give us our special ed teacher. So her name was Birdie, and she came into our home, and God used Birdie in an amazing way to help Nate. So what she would do is right from the very start, what she did was it was us. It wasn't her and Nathan. It was, we were a team. And she saw Nathan for 18 months, and I learned so much from her. She gave me homework to do for him, with him through the week. And I would do everything she recommended that we would do. And she loved Nate. And it was so sweet to see that, she was invested in him and I could see that. And like with Nate, he loved it when Birdie would come.
I was going to ask if he was receptive.
And this was kind of I think that's what was sweet for me is that he loved it when she came. He would be excited, and Nathan really didn't get excited about people too often, but with Birdie, it was.
What kind of things did she do with them?
So first, there's like getting Nathan to sit and listen for 5 minutes of instruction Okay, which doesn't seem like a lot, but
It's a task.
and just building on those things. And she was able to read him like, you want to push him, but you don't want to push him over the edge because then you couldn't do the work with him.
Couldn't recover.
Yeah. So she was able to read him and she was able to push his boundaries. And I was very happy that she was able to read him. It was God's kindness to us, and then through, all of this, just praying, one of my prayers I would say all the time. And a lot of times just being like desperation, like, Lord, help us. Lord, help me. Lord, help my son. It was always help, and oftentimes it was like through sobbing, it's like, I didn't even know what else to pray.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I didn't even know what would help him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know what to ask.
Yeah.
Just help.
And so you feel helpless. You feel like, he's struggling, he's hurting, he's, and you feel, as a parent. And I know Jared, as the father, I know that he at times would feel that helplessness. And when God would bring people into our lives or situations, we were so thankful that he was answering those prayers. He was answering those cries,
So when did you get the actual autism diagnosis then? And how did you handle that?
So he turned 5 in September, and then we went, and one of the reasons why we ended up going again to a doctor was because once Nathan actually started talking, I was starting to see his learning issues. So he was, I don't necessarily want to call it a learning disability, but a very unique learning style. So he was very, very visual. And so he had a hard time auditory processing. So following directions or words that didn't have like a picture, like abstract words, like the word thrive,
Right.
or, the word serious, those kinds
Ideas.
of words where you couldn't show him.
Yeah.
I think that's what he struggled with early on, was that it was a literal language delay. Because sometimes I would tell Jared, it's like we're speaking to him in a different language. And then his other thing was that auditory processing, where if we would give him directions, and if there was too many steps in the direction, it was like information overload.
Yeah.
And even now, that's, one of his, he has a ton of strengths, but that's his auditory processing. He's very bright person. But if I say, hey, Nate, can you run out to the van underneath the back seat in the blue bag? Can you grab my purse? Nope.
Too many steps.
Too many. It's like information overload. So he was diagnosed when he was 5. So we went into a developmental pediatrician who specializes in autism. And so she spent, lots of questions, spent time with Nathan. And then she said, I have, no question that your son's on the autism spectrum.
Were you prepared for that, or were you still like...
Actually, yes. So we got the diagnosis, and I obviously was not surprised. We didn't know a ton about autism, but we were seeing an autism specialist because we just wanted... Oh, and one thing that was leading up to this is, so he was doing 100-piece puzzles before he was like really even talking. And so we thought, this is so odd. How is he?
Yeah.
Why can he
His
talk?
brain
Why
can do that?
Right.
But,
So there were things leading up to that. But so when we're on the way home, I can see him in the rear view mirror, and he's sitting back there with his adorable little face. I just remember just praising God that he was my son. I was just so thankful that God chose me to be his mom. And like, I wasn't scared. And it wasn't the diagnosis. It was just God's peace, that it didn't really matter, what he was diagnosed with, that, God's hand was in this always. He had been from, Nathan's whole life. And I just remember like driving home and just looking at his sweet face in the rearview mirror. And I just was so thankful. God has continued to just be faithful in just the little things and like the small victories that may seem so trivial, that I would, just celebrate and just thank the good Lord for,
Yeah.
because it was it has been his kindness to us. And
isn't it amazing the peace God gives in those moments
Yeah.
where
You receive.
if you think about something happening,
Yes.
you never imagine that you would have a peace, but God's
it was,
God gives that is so
and
like
it is.
him.
It's so like him. Yeah. We weren't doing this without the Lord.
yeah.
There was no way.
Yeah.
And we knew. So when Nathan's diagnosed at 5, so now we are a family of 6, and Jared got a job at IU. So that was our last year in New England. But once Nathan was diagnosed with autism, then I just went on a reading frenzy about autism. But the one book from Temple Grandin called The Way I See It was the most helpful and pivotal book that I read on autism. One of the huge things that stuck out, sensory issues. Like then we were just like, this poor kid, like dry heaving because of certain textures of foods. Again, we thought he was just a picky eater. And then one of the biggest things that we learned was we knew that he was a visual learner, but once we read that, it was like he thinks in pictures. That's why he doesn't understand certain words, because there's no picture to it. And we also stopped, he had so many different, delays and behavioral issues that were always front and center, that we were trying to not necessarily fix, but that we were trying to, help him, have control and, stop
Overcome
having
them.
these freakouts and, overcome some of, these issues. And, in doing that, that's just what a lot of your focus is on, right? However, the danger in that, even though you do need to help in the delays and the weaknesses, you have to do that even with typical children, right? We always have weaknesses and strengths, but for us, I think we were focusing so much on his weaknesses that we were missing these beautiful strengths that the Lord had given Nathan. And once God opened our eyes, like there's way more to Nate than what we're paying attention to.
Right.
Like he loved puzzles, and this was really calming for him. And, so he would spend, hours building his puzzles, and then, Lincoln logs and, potato heads. I know it might not seem like that it's a strength, but it was something. It was
sit and focus and enjoy.
It was constructive for him. He was so creative. He loved to draw. Through all of this, his relationship that he's had with Noah has been just, I know that, God designed these two to be brothers. Noah always could see Nathan's strengths.
And never seemed to resent him for the weaknesses or anything.
Never. I mean, even during Nathan's freakouts, like even when I look back, it was so odd. Here was this like little boy, and he loved Nate so much. He was like so tender with him. He was like a typical brother and could be annoying at times, but like he like was protective of Nathan. When we'd have to leave the park, we'd have to leave the birthday party, whenever we couldn't go to Sunday school anymore. I don't ever remember Noah complaining.
You're in Bloomington now at this point.
Yes.
With the diagnosis. Was it difficult for Nate to make friends? Was Noah it? Did he make friends outside of the family?
No.
What was developing relationships like for him?
So when we lived up in New England, we had a lot of loving families. But, Nathan never had, and he was still young. So he was almost 6 when we moved here. So he hadn't really connected with kids, before we left, like he was still going up to kids on the playground, and, there were times when he would just roar at them. Like he just didn't even know how to have a communication. So when we moved here, so it was just him and Noah, and then he had Lauren and Luke, which he was super sweet to. Now I have to mention that by this time, his screaming fits had come to an end. So his screaming started at age 2 and lasted up until it was shortly after he was diagnosed, because I remember it being, the screaming would be far,
few and far between.
Yes, few and far between. And so his reaction to his getting agitated and things was he would start crying, actually. So his outlet, it easy to see that the screaming had switched to crying. And we even were able to start to see him seeing and actually trying to exercise self-control. And that is still, something that, he still has to work on to this day. And again, this is one thing that God has just poured out his mercy and to help Nathan have self-control. But him having certain outlets with puzzle building and being creative and those types of things, it really helped to mellow him, and he was, also maturing, even though it was very tempting to revolve our life around our son who has special needs. We just knew we couldn't do this. It wouldn't be obviously good for him. It would not be good for our family. In fact, it's even odd that we're just talking about Nate because, I have 6 other kids.
Right.
Because it's like, whether you have a child with special needs or not, our kids are all special and they all have needs, right? I mean, really.
I love it.
They do,
It's true.
And so we all need help. We all need help. Yeah. Because there's other things I deal with my other kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it may not be autism, but it's something.
Yeah.
That's unique to them. By the time we moved here, he had really mellowed. And once we had like Lauren and Luke as babies, even when Lauren was born, he was like very screamy, agitated, it was just really difficult. And so we were nervous that whenever we would have a baby, what he would be like. And in God's kindness, he was the most sweetest and tender with that little girl. I was trying to prepare myself, that there would be behavioral problems. And he still, was still in that season of screaming and having fits, but
not in relation to Lauren.
No. And so what was so sweet was this is the first time I saw, other than him with Noah, and they loved each other and they were cuddly and goofballs. But like when I first saw him kissing his little sister, it was the sweetest thing because it was like, you get scared sometimes because you see like this rage in your child. And then sometimes if it's like days on end.
And then to see this tenderness.
The sweet tenderness. Because there were days where I would just cry because when he would have like a string of bad days, I was like, is this our new normal?
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Then the Lord would bring relief. And so when Lauren was born, it was very sweet. And then 15 months later, Luke was born and Nathan, he just loves babies. Yeah. And God used, those to show us that Nathan had this just
another side to himself.
So we moved to Bloomington and we are welcomed by our church. So we got invited to go to, one of the first families was the Ummels. They had us over for dinner. And this was the first time that Nathan met Josiah, which is their third son. And it was really sweet to see their first interaction. Now, keep in mind, so Nathan at this point, so he's talking.
Right.
He's talking in sentences. His articulation is much better. And he has always been very literal. And so if I'd say, Nate, how'd you sleep last night? He'd be like, in bed with my eyes closed. Right. A very literal, that has living with a family like us, right. He has a sense of humor and, he gets sarcasm now, I think the Lord specifically put him with the Cochrans so that he would learn sarcasm and could not survive with a literal mentality if he lived with us. But anyways, so when he, and then Nathan he just has a personality where he just says what he thinks. So anyways, so whatever is on Nathan's mind, like he just says. And so when he meets Josiah for the first time, they're sitting down beside each other. And Nathan said, "Hey, Josiah, you're black." And Josiah's like, "Well, actually, I'm brown." I was like, oh, that is so cute. Okay, so that was So anyway, so we have dinner with the Ummels, and so it was very sweet. And then Archie had brought the boys over to help us build our play gym, and he brought Josiah over. It did not take long at all for he and Josiah to click, and so we had moved here in August when he had just was turning 6. And so it must have been that following summer that when Nate was almost 7, they were swimming in our pool and us parents were sitting on the deck, and Josiah and Nate were in the water splashing around. They're talking, and we're sitting there. And so up to this point, Nathan did not even know he had autism. So anyway, so they're swimming, and then we hear Josiah say, "Hey, Nate." And Nate's like, "What?" He goes, "Did you know you have autism?" And Nate goes, "What's autism?" And so we were sitting there listening to them, and it was so funny. We just found it just so comical. And
what did Josiah say?
And then Josiah, then he started singing the song to Nathan about "You're so special." And so he sings the song to Nathan, and it is the sweetest thing. Yeah. I mean, we were sitting there and we were laughing, but, thinking about it now, it just was just one of those sweetest moments. And that was it.
He's 14 now. Have things just kind of leveled out? Or what have things been like?
So through the years, the things that he struggles most with now is his hearing sensory issues, where he has certain sounds that basically drive him crazy. And that has been his number one issue. He could be in a crowded place and that noise won't bother him. We have a drum set in our house that gets played. We have 7 children, lots of noisy boys. He can handle that, but whistle? No, thank you. He struggles with certain pitches.
Yeah.
He has a hard time right now with the voice of our 5-year-old. Just their talking voice.
Is it just really high pitched, or is something
it's so
about
odd.
It? Yeah.
Now, as he gets a little bit older, he'll be fine, because he did that with Luke and Adam
when they were about that age.
But so we learned early on that he needed a plan. Like if someone's making a noise that he can't handle, and so in general, that would work. But again, having a bunch of kids, it turned to this. How did he used to say it? It would be "Coopy stop," because he would say it so fast. "Coopy stop." Could we stop? Like, could you please stop?
Right.
And so, but this has literally been, since he's 7, he's 14. So for the past 7 years, every single day, he struggles with hearing sensory issues. Now, he definitely exercises self-control way more than what he used to. And that has come, again, in God's kindness to him in answering our prayers and helping him to have self-control. Because, he does actually have a choice. A saying that Jared says to him, he said early on when Nathan was struggling with this, was, "Nathan, do not let your autism control you. You control your autism." And Jared would actually make Nathan repeat that and say that, because you can just let go and just let it rule your life. Let this, the sensory issues just take over.
Yeah.
And so it does take, self-discipline to tune it out. Or I even asked him early on, I think it was causing him actual discomfort in his ears. Like he just couldn't handle the feeling, know. But now if I ask, what happened? And it would be more of, he just can't handle it's just so annoying that he can't handle it. He had piano lessons one time, and Amanda started snapping like this to this. And then I was in the next room. I was like, oh boy.
Yeah.
I was waiting, and he said to her, "You don't need to do that." Oh, that was a huge deal for me, because I was literally just waiting for him to, I don't think he would go off. I think that he would just get really agitated and mad, but no, he did not. So again, God was giving us these little glimpses of him just having to deal with that.
You spent a lot of time helping Nate not let his autism control him. How, and you said earlier that you're not a typical autism mom. How do you discipline yourself, or what are ways that you keep yourself from orientating your life around Nate's autism?
I think one of the biggest things that God has used is by blessing us with a very large family. And I wholeheartedly believe that because we have a lot of children, we could not revolve our world around Nathan. And that has been the best thing for him. I think my temptation, for him was just that I think I just have a tendency where I wanted to baby him. But it was basically me like not even thinking that Nathan could do that or want to do that, or he wouldn't understand the directions. He wouldn't be strong enough to, carry that wood to the backyard, And Nathan is very strong. He's very competent. But, I think it's just his brother spoke up for him. And it's just like, Nathan can do this. And so that's one thing that I've been very thankful for, because that was always my tendency.
Well, it probably gives Nate more confidence too in doing and trying things and persevering. And
yeah, I mean, even when I would look back, it's just God's hand all through it. Yeah. Because why would we think, okay, we're not going to let this child be the center of our universe. We are not going to let him.
That's the natural tendency. That's what the autistic community would have you do. I mean,
yeah. And so,
where'd you get that idea from?
Yeah. Well, that's what I mean. This was even before he was diagnosed with autism, where he was like, we could either, we had the choice where we could either walk on eggshells and do everything perfectly so that Nathan would be okay and not be set off. But, I don't even know how we would even live like that. It would be miserable. And I'm sure there'd be a lot of, resentment, not just towards Nathan, but just in a family, like how hard that would be to just have one person that you're just making sure that they are okay. Yeah. But I think that, you don't like to see your child suffer, but we all know from experience what God does in our suffering. Yeah. And it looks different for all of us. Nathan has his own suffering that God is using for Nathan to become the man that God wants him to be. And I know that God will use Nathan's suffering to bring him glory. And, often we have to tell Nathan, you just need to be praying. You can't do this on your own, especially on the hard days, you're not going to, do battle with this on your own. And, I pray for him every day. For Jared and I, like you say, when your kid go through something, it's like whenever you do feel helpless, you as a parent, you just want to just fix things. You want to make things so that your kid's happy and comfortable. But it's like when you do fix everything for your kids, I think that's where the seed of, entitlement and not being grateful. But when you're a parent, I think the suffering for Jared and I is just waiting, is during those times where you're just asking God, just please help us, please help. And the days seem long. What's the saying? The days are long, but the years are short. Well, with these, specifically, ages 2 through 5, those 3 years that's where God cleaned us out and he emptied us. And I can see now that that weakness was the best thing for Jared and I. It was the best thing for our family. That God had taught us really early on in our parenting that you're not going to do this without me.
Monumental is hosted by Katie Walker and Amy Molina. It is produced and edited by Katie Walker, and it is executive produced by Nathan Alberson and Jake Menzel. If you like the show, please don't forget to rate and review in the app of your choice. And if you're interested in more great content, including articles and other podcasts, please visit warhornmedia.com.